Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the our very special series on global politics on the KAJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much. Always glad to be here.
Welcome. So, Irina, several big topics again today. This time, a lot of India in there in these topics. And so, first topic itself, our Prime Minister Modi, he is in Israel now. Help us understand about all the things that are important of this visit. Why this visit happening? Why now?
Well, there is a lot of symbolism around this visit. This is, first of all, Prime Minister Modi is the first Prime Minister of India to visit Israel in 2017. This is his second trip, and it comes amid rising tensions in the Middle East. The US-Iran standoff is something that's been growing for a while now. We've had the 12-day war in June last year, and for the past couple of months, the tensions have been brewing. Tomorrow is supposed to be the deadline for negotiations on a nuclear deal. There's expectation of potential hostilities breaking out, and amidst all of this, India is trying to balance between showing its support for the Gulf stability amidst its rising growing relations with Gulf Arab states on the one hand, and also the growing cooperation with Israel. So this timing is no accident. There is definitely strategic communication in all of this, but also it comes at a time where both countries are looking to increase their strategic cooperation amidst rising threats. The visit of the topic of the visit is specifically focused on defense and innovation issues. All of it is pointing to the two countries looking to join forces much more strategically to meet the rising challenges.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. So, who gets what in this visit? Is Netanyahu the winner, or Israel is the winner? Is India a winner? How do you see it from that point in view, Irina?
It's very much a win-win for both countries for various reasons. Of course, there is a growing warm cooperation not only between the leaders but also between the two countries on a popular level. There's a lot of business already ongoing between India and Israel. Indian visitors travel to Israel freely, and likewise a lot of Israeli tourists and high school graduates taking a gap year before their military service frequently travel and hike through India and enjoy Indian culture. Also, strategically, it's a major win for both Israel and India. Israel gets to show the fact that despite the difficult diplomatic and political situation after October 7th, it has strong allies and growing alliances. For India, it's a major win because India very much admires Israel's innovation culture, the startup nation, and as itself is rising as a technological power, and we'll be talking about the AI summit from earlier in the last couple of weeks. India is very much looking to join forces with Israel in that regard, to learn from its expertise and innovation culture, but also to contribute to joint interests in this matter. And of course, on defense issues, both countries share both the difficult history of confronting terrorism, ideological extremism, and political campaigns against them, but also learning from those experiences, assisting each other in various matters, and now looking to further integrate their capabilities much more formally, to take these relationships to the next level, to share best practices, and to create a much more strategically grounded position in the region.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, is it very normal for Israel to be so, nice and you, because Indian Prime Minister, he spoke at their parliament, great words, lot about, mentioned Hamas also. He got uh, the you can say the name that biggest prize or something, whatever award or their medal of honor or something like that they bestowed on the Indian Prime Minister. That is also something. And Netanyahu going out on Twitter or X and saying in Hindi, aapka swagat hai, means you are welcome. How does this whole atmosphere look like from that point on view? Is Netanyahu trying to speak something beyond what is being seen? Is it more about optics here?
I think optics are very important element, and I think on many levels, all of this is very genuine, and I do think there's a great deal of very friendly rapport between the two leaders, leaving aside all the other strategic considerations, and because the two countries have so much in common. Uh, both prime ministers have positioned themselves as strong, security minded leaders, also dedicated to innovation and in their countries. I do think it spills over into their interactions. So I don't think it's all simply choreography. I think a lot of it is very genuine, and I think you can't really fake genuine positive relationships. I think it's very difficult to imitate without something being visibly askew. And I do think also inside Israel there was generally a very positive view of India as a country. There is an Indian Jewish diaspora community there. There's a growing number of Indian workers and experts who are coming into Israel for various types of works. There's growing business cooperation, which means there's also more frequent business travel. So the perception there is also not just surface level. At the same time, however, there is very much a strategic message that is being communicated to India itself, of course, to the Middle East, and to the world at large. It is not just the fact that Prime Minister Modi's speech at the Knesset was groundbreaking, but that the medal bestowed upon him is the first of such kind. This kind of honor has not even been bestowed on President Trump, who is considered to be the closest friend of Israel by many Israelis. So this is something unique, and I think it's worth underscoring. So the message is, first of all, the message of appreciation for what Israelis perceive as a very genuine and deep friendship that has uh, a potential to grow even deeper on popular level as much as on political level. But it's also a communication showing that the two countries have managed to survive their challenges and to flourish despite, a lot of time a biased political outlook, assorted external attacks, and all sorts of pressure against them. And I think the fact that both countries are striving to engage in very diverse relationships and to, on the one hand, show the goodwill towards the whole world, but at the same time to structure their alliances around some core principles, and uh, to increase their independence. Even Israel is looking to increase its independence from the United States. I think there is, I think that is actually part of the message being communicated here.
How does it help, Mr. Netanyahu, in that? There have been allegations about how he has approached the judiciary, the corruption charges, his elections. How does that? Do you think it will help him in any way, or this is more between two nations? And second question here, Irina, is that traditionally over the last couple of decades, India and Israel have become much more closer in several areas. This particular visit, does it take it? It will take it further, but what are the more areas which will get much more stronger after this?
The strategic value of this rapprochement is so significant that even the staunchest critics of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his foreign policy, his domestic policy, his self-interest, his dealings with the assorted bodies inside Israel, they have not been even interested in undermining this visit with any sort of shade or critique or political insinuations. This is fairly astounding and fairly unique, and it speaks to the fact that even Netanyahu's political adversaries and opponents understand that this goes way beyond Netanyahu, that this relationship is going to flourish no matter who is in power in Israel, and that domestic political struggles, as legitimate as they may be, should not interfere with one of the greatest assets that Israel um, is finding in this relationship, in its current foreign policy environment, and it's going to be an asset even long after the dust settles and a lot of the current controversies are left behind in the past. I think it has a very enduring foundation, objectively speaking, and not simply because Netanyahu needs to distract from his own personal political foibles, or because Israel needs to direct attention away from its tensions with its neighbors.
Absolutely, absolutely. That brings me to this question, Irina. Who do you think was watching it and who is watching this particular visit?
I think despite all the controversies in the United States this past week between the tensions with Iran, the State of the Union speech, the SCOTUS tariff decision, the ongoing war in Ukraine, the Epstein files, and all of these scandals and developments and domestic concerns, I think the Americans do watch it very closely, not the least because both countries are seen as strong allies or partners of the United States. Israel is considered to be the closest U.S. ally in the Middle East. India is seen as a very strong partner on many levels, including, despite all the trade-related controversies, as a business partner and as a potential ally against Chinese influence. So for Americans, that too was a major development, a very positive one, I would say, except for the people who for whatever reason dislike either both countries or both leaders. But you always have some of those. Overall, I think it's an important and positive um, foundation for increased cooperation between allied countries um, in um, in the Middle East. And let's not forget that Israel and India are already cooperating along with the US and along with the United Arab Emirates as part of I2U2 group. Strategic bloc. So all of that just strengthens the positive perception many people have. The Arab world, of course, is watching it very closely because of their own increased investments in India, not only from a financial perspective, but as a growing partner, a potential AI and technology and defense and energy counterpart in many ways. Um, IMEC or IMEC Plus is also in the back of everyone's mind as a potential economic corridor connecting India to the Middle East, including Israel. All of this is watched very closely from a strategic perspective, but by a lot of these countries, they have independent growing relations with India as well. So for everyone, it's a very important development because it brings together so many issues. Even African countries, I think, are watching this closely because both Israel and India are increasing their reach economically, politically, from a security perspective in Africa as well. So there may be additional trilateral economic corridors down the road between which include India, Israel, and perhaps one or two countries. This is not yet a public topic of discussion so much, but I'm hinting at it because, in my opinion, it's a very natural direction. I don't know uh, who will be the specific counterparts in that arrangement, but I think we're seeing some interesting signs of potential cooperation on common ground and also against common threats in that increasingly important continent. So I think pretty much everyone is watching this closely. China, of course, is not indifferent to this either. China has done a great deal of business with Israel in recent years. It's done a great deal of business with India, including more recently. Of course, it's heavily embedded in the Middle East. So, no matter the political controversy of the day as a long term issue, it has to watch such developments closely because they touch on important business and political foundations for China's interests in both Asia and the Middle East.
Absolutely, Irina. Do you think there are any players or player who would not be so happy with this whole, togetherness between India and Israel?
Well, clearly, the countries that, for whatever reason, are not particularly separately, have good relations with other countries, are probably not happy either. It is true, for instance, that while Pakistan has at various points in time pursued a limited tactical engagement with Israel, overall, there is a fair amount of resistance to any positive Israel engagement, to the point that, unlike, for instance, many Arab countries which simply don't have diplomatic relations with Israel, Pakistan essentially bans anyone with Israeli passport from entering the country, and has a very restrictive view for anyone who's not specifically approved by the government to enter Israel. I cannot imagine that Pakistanis would be particularly happy about all of this, because to some extent they also view it as a competitive as a loss of potential of competitive advantage. They want to have access to Israeli technologies, but without having to go through full diplomatic normalization. They also do not wish for India to benefit from the very same technologies and expertise and economic investments and political benefits of that relationship, because they know that on the one hand they don't want to, but on the other hand they also can't pursue the same course to the same extent. So there is that a little bit dog in the manger attitude from that camp, and also from I can't imagine that some of Pakistan's allies, such as Turkey or Qatar, are altogether happy. Just despite the fact that both do business with India quite extensively, they also have had political issues meddling in India's internal affairs. There are Islamist political um, undertones to those relationships that challenge full engagement and political closeness. And of course, while Israel too has had either fully normalized relations with Turkey or some business relationships with Qatar, and Qatar played a mediating role in various political issues involving Israel. Quite clearly, those two countries are working to isolate Israel in the Middle East, and India's huge role entering the region in general, and now so openly engaging with Israel, challenges that recent strategy a great deal. It also poses a dilemma for Saudi Arabia, that too has recently tried to portray Israel as the troublemaker in the Middle East. and has joined Qatar, Turkey, even Iran to some extent in that political um, rhetoric and communication strategy. So, Saudi Arabia, that has an incredibly important and growing relationship with India, finds itself in a sort of quandary because, on the one hand, yes, it can have separate, independent uh, political attitudes with both countries. On the other hand, the more India and Israel integrate, the harder it's going to be to completely ignore that and pretend that Israel doesn't exist or that it can be pushed aside simply because once technologies start integrating, once defensive posture starts integrating, once relationship goes beyond simple trade and more towards increased strategic integration, it starts affecting everything on a much deeper level, and therefore countries that wish to complete to steer clear of one will have to also either steer clear of the other and limit their relationship, or they're going to have to accept to some extent that Israel is simply going to be part of the picture for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for that great analysis, Irina. Now let's move on to another topic. That's the Brazil's President Lula's India India visit. Help us understand how do you see this visit from that part of the world, especially the memorandum of understanding on rare earths, and critical minerals. This is something big that is even everyone is looking at rare earths from their own perspective.
It's interesting that it comes at this time. Of course, Brazil and India are both part of BRICS, and they've had long and growing relationships in terms of business, trade, technology transfers for some time. Brazil is also growing as a in the defense sector to some extent. But this was sort of a groundbreaking moment to some extent. President Lula is trying to increase Brazil's geopolitical significance. He has been making the international rounds lately. His stopover at the AI summit in India was no accident. His engagement with Prime Minister Modi and the conclusion of this agreement was um, not just a courtesy call, it was built into this structured negotiation with very clear deliverables. And this idea to lock in cooperation on critical minerals and rare earths is likewise strategic because of the importance of both of these factors to AI and to energy, and both countries are looking to advance their interest to break free from the existing frameworks and to advance to grow their potential. Brazil is also a fairly populous country. It's considered one of the stronger and most economically significant actors in Latin America, despite challenges with the current issues facing Venezuela. Brazil is rising as a power in Latin America and seeking to advance as much as possible and to use this opportunity. Both countries view minerals as strategic power. India is one of the increasingly major producers of some of these important critical minerals. Um, um, Lithium, for instance, India stands to benefit from finding significant deposits of lithium and to challenge China's dominance in that regard down the road. And of course, India, as a growing economy, needs reliable inputs for electronics, for defense production, for batteries, and for industrial expansion. Brazil, too, holds major reserves and it wants partners that can bring scale, investment, and industrial demand. And India is a natural huge market for all of that. So the minerals tracks give a concrete economic focus to this engagement, and with a also a geopolitical undercurrent. All of this. There's also a message to the international community about supply chain independence. Because Prime Minister Modi framed secure inputs as essential to India's technology and manufacturing ambitions. And for Lula, this cooperation is a way for Brazil to gain leverage and value, not only to export raw materials. So this creates a shared narrative of building resilient supply lines outside the tight control of existing dominant suppliers. And of course, trade targets are another major headline point in that regard. Modi publicly set a higher trade ambition over the next 5 years, and so this meeting is about advancing that agenda as well. And Lula reinforced that messaging because he brought with him a large delegation, and he very much included business outcomes into this political messaging. Both leaders are tying specific numbers to their national goals. It creates accountability, it creates reason to keep the relationship active even past the immediacy of the visit. But the meeting was not just about mining, it was also about elevating cooperation in digital transformation and in emerging technologies, including AI. Lula views AI as a civilization level issue where ethical direction matters, and he sees India as a partner that can bring intellectual tradition and as well as the large scale deployment capacity. For Modi, uh, this AI summit was an opportunity to present India as a builder of local systems that work at population scale. And there is a very clear overlap in those interests. AI, therefore, serves as a tool for industry, for health, for public administration, and all of that is part of the uh, economic and political goals for both countries. And of course, defense and security cooperation is still part of the relationship's backbone. Um, India wants diverse suppliers and technology partners. Brazil wants strategic autonomy and defense industrial modernization. Part of the meeting was presenting defense ties as a pillar and not just a side issue the way it was before. So the partnership is transitioning from mostly commercial to now strategic level direction, and even energy transition and climate projects were also featured as part of this discussion. For Lula, climate diplomacy is a signature domain. He wants Brazil to become a leader in that regard. For India, energy transition is both a development and a security issue tied to industrial growth. The convergence here uh, uh, lies in the ability to cooperate on a practical level on renewables, on industrial decarbonization, and the materials that are needed for those industries. So this advances industrial planning for both countries, and there's also a message towards multilateralism. Both leaders have used this meeting to amplify global South positioning in global governance discussions, including the ideas about institutional reforms and setting agendas in international forums. And they are now able to present themselves as representatives of large democracies that want greater influence over how rules are written in places like the United Nations. And so this is not just about bilateral trade, it's also about coalition building internationally. Of course, being BRICS countries, they discussed currency, payment themes, because for Lula, that's actually part of Brazil's broader diplomacy. Um, Lula wants the idea of expanding trade in national currency and reducing over reliance on the dollar in specific transactions. It's not just about de dollarization for its own sake, the way it may be, for instance, for China and Russia, as it is about strengthening national currency. It's also basically a nationalist issue. Um, and for India, it's also about pragmatic economic resilience. It's not really about ideology as much. Although there are a lot of technical issues still to be solved, the message is clear. Both countries want to increase cooperation and operations, broadly speaking, in global finance. So of course, the fact that this is potentially a very strategic relationship was seen by the optics. There was a lot of ceremony, personal rapport, and the prestige event of the visit itself, alongside other global leadership engagement that took place at that summit, and none of that should be missed by anyone watching these developments. And by the way, part of that is also a message to Donald Trump, who, on the one hand, is still in the midst of tensions with India over trade deal, which has now been essentially disrupted by the tariff decision of the Supreme Court and by Trump's intent to impose 15% global tariffs, despite the limits set by the law on that issue. And he also, at the same time, is very much not a fan of Lula. He that is not a leader that Trump admires in any way. He's been very critical of him quite openly and quite publicly. So there is sort of a message, although it's not nearly the main point of that get together. It still carries a message to the United States as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking of AI summit, let's talk about the India AI Impact Summit. Means how would you like to see it from that point in view? Political leaders, business leaders, leaders of artificial intelligence, all converging in New Delhi. What was this? How were you looking at it? What was the messaging? What was the message out of it all?
Well, clearly, if India is trying to position itself as a new player in the AI game and to propose not only a national strategy, not only breaking away um, uh, from dependence on U.S. set or China set frameworks, but to become a leader in the arena, to dedicate itself to independent research and advancement of the field. So the the implications for the industry as well as for diplomacy are enormous. That's why we've seen a whole host of international leaders come visit: President Macron, Lula, Giorgia Meloni. Uh, all of these people have either made uh, visits or at least brief appearances, and of course, MBZ from UAE was one of the most visible figures there. Not a coincidence either. Not only has India recently concluded independent additional agreements with UAE alongside the generally growing relationship, both economic and security, but UAE itself is striving to become a leader in AI. So there is room for both cooperation and competition in that regard, and that was very very clear from the start. They were spotted other European, Indian, and other American and international officials, business leaders from AI fields looking to invest or to do business with India. So there is a clearly a message, an image of India emerging potentially as a central architect of the global AI order. We are seeing that there is a very conscious effort to blend diplomacy and industrial signaling as well as domestic political messaging as a display of ambition and to show that India is no longer content to be simply a technology services provider. It wants to shape standards, supply chains, as well as governance norms at the highest level on the international, as a leader in the international community. Uh, there are also they were also members of the emerging powers present at the event, and that too was not a coincidence. There is an effort to bring together state and corporate power to show that AI has also moved from a purely technical topic into a core geopolitical domain. And this India's messaging is very much about multipolar legitimacy and not just alignment with some particular single bloc. And for India, the emphasis was very much on AI as public infrastructure. It's not merely an elite research domain, but a mass utility which has a direct impact on health systems, on agriculture, education, public administration. That's a message that carries a lot of weight with the global south, where India is also striving to lead. Governments there generally prioritize scale and affordability over abstract safety debates, as has become all too often the topic of discussion in the United States, and even more so in Europe and Australia and other Western countries. India's message was simple and powerful in that regard. AI should serve populations, not only laboratories. So there's a practical element about it. There's too much focus on chatbots and not enough on the practical implementation, automation of key industries that facilitate advancements in basic day-to-day activities and occupations. There's also there is, however, also a focus on multilingual AI development. India has literally hundreds of languages spoken domestically, and there is a natural and practical incentive to build inclusive language models. Until now, that has been fairly limited. India wants to position itself as a leader in linguistic AI accessibility. This is very important globally because most current AI systems still very much privilege the English language and a handful of other major languages. India looks to present itself as the country solving that imbalance at scale that can actually make a difference. And uh, India is also using the summit to reinforce its digital public goods model, highlighting its experience in building large population scale digital systems that are both open and interoperable. So now that it's extending that philosophy into AI governance, India is looking to export a template for state enabled but non monopolistic digital ecosystems. So many developing nations view and will view this model as a viable alternative to both American corporate dominance and to Chinese state platforms. So this is a sort of third way that India is presenting here. It also is at the same time still deepening strategic technology ties with the United States as well as key European partners. Let's recall that just recently India also concluded a free trade deal with the European Union. Artificial intelligence now very much intersects with semiconductors, with defense systems, surveillance technologies, and data governance. So this was a venue to have these discussions and to align priorities on supply chain resilience, on the research collaboration in these key areas. There were no dramatic announcements, so to speak, but the symbolism itself was quite important. We are now seeing that AI is increasingly embedded in the very architecture of strategic partnerships. But India is also signaling technological independence. Um, it certainly welcomed foreign companies, but it also emphasized domestic capacity building, local model development, as well as sovereign ambitions in computing. So, this is actually a reflection of a broader strategy to engage global partners while avoiding deep structural dependency. And the messaging then balanced openness with strategic autonomy, which reinforces and advances India's um, direction in shaping rather than merely inheriting the rules of the AI era. So there were, of course, some hiccups here and there, execution, structural contradictions. There was issues with logistical strain, congestion at the summit, some organizational friction issues, exposing some gaps between ambition and administrative capacity. Um, because India is trying to portray itself as a future technology superpower, operational shortcomings will naturally draw outside scrutiny. However, nothing of that sort derailed the summit. although they reminded everyone that institutional scale still is and remains work in progress and will benefit from many of these partnerships that were being forged or reinforced and advanced at that gathering.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Now, one last thing on this particular India AI Impact Summit is that the whole world seemed to be converging, at this particular place called India, especially on New Delhi India AI Impact Summit. How would you like to see China's participation in it? Do you think it was a bit subdued, especially
I
when India China
Mhm.
seem to be trying to regain their old ground on these relationships, especially with so much of commonality also between two neighbors. How do you see China's role here? Do you think they would be reluctant to play a big part like US and other, even Europe is doing, or do you think there will be time when it will all come together?
For now, at least, China seems to wish to stay out of the limelight at such gatherings. Part of it is understandable, clear, and obvious conflict of interest because China is a natural competitor to the United States, seeing a very large American and European presence at the summit was a turnoff to China, and frictions were very likely to happen. It was probably best that there wasn't a very high profile Chinese presence. I am sure there were some people in the audience taking notes and taking in what was going on, uh, if only to frame their own independent discussions with India in that regard. But there is another aspect to it, leaving aside uh, the American companies that are increasingly unpopular in China, or the love hate relationship with the European Union. There is also the concern that India may become a strategic competitor in that regard, and that India at sooner or later could become a very serious problem on the scale and on the level that will strain China's resources in trying to keep up. Because it's one thing to compete with the United States and to focus all your energy in competing with the US, but when you have another country taking a very different focus and direction in trying to innovate in this area while also benefiting from the American and European technical expertise, for China, that may become a much more serious concern later on, and this is something that they're not really willing to celebrate. For them, they can cooperate with India on some strategic technical issues, but AI is an area that China seeks to dominate. They see it almost as a territorial turf that they want to own, and anyone who impedes on that turf, they cannot fully see a partnership with.
Absolutely. One more thing that comes to my mind, Irina, is that a lot of this dialogue was about individual identities for countries when they will be making their own AIs in their own language, which will be talking about them. And that is where from France we had Mistral AI. In India we already had this Sarvanam app and all those things. So many things are every country, even in other places of the world, people are talking about their own AI in their own language so that they can preserve their cultural identities and language. Amidst all these things, even Sam Altman was there in strong, force. Even Cloud was there. How do you see these two worlds meeting there? Isn't this new world that is coming about individual identities also leading to a lot of competition for the established players like ChatGPT or Claude or others?
There is a growing competition among those companies, and there's certainly going to be some competition with the Indian counterparts down the road. But for now, it's a good opportunity to learn from the best, to integrate best approaches, and for India, it's an opportunity to choose among competing countries, the approaches, and the end products that work out the best. It's a very exciting time. Not all of these companies will ultimately survive, but those who do will help define the direction of their products and innovation for the near future. And it's very it's a very positive thing to be on that end of the spectrum where you're taking in the competition as it occurs, and when you get a front row seat and you get to take your first pick of the winners.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Let's move on to the from the India AI Impact Summit to the Supreme Court of America. How did that impacted Trump's tariffs? Is it a setback to him? He seemed to be prepared with some new articles to invoke.
Yeah, it's actually a complete. It creates a sudden rupture in the administration's entire trade strategy, because the ruling did not just remove specific tariffs; it challenged the entire legal architecture, which justified unilateral executive action on trade under national security authorities. It was literally a legal shock to the White House, and the Trump administration tried to pivot quickly, and their response was, as one might expect from Trump, escalation rather than retreat. Trump, as I mentioned, reacted by announcing a new wave of global tariffs, framed as structurally different from the ones struck down by the court. They essentially repackaged tariffs under revised statutory authority and broader economic nationalism language, um, signaling that the political commitment to tariff leverage remains intact regardless of judicial constraints. It also reinforced Trump's longstanding belief that tariffs are not merely economic tools, but instruments of geopolitical bargaining. Um, but broadly speaking, this injected volatility into global markets and diplomatic channels. Both allies and rivals interpreted the move as a sign that US is doubling down on economic coercion as a core of foreign policy methods, and even countries accustomed to the Trump era trade tactics were struck by the speed and scale of the response following the court's decision. I don't think everyone expected Trump to react so quickly. I mean, of course, on the domestic level, that creates a huge uh, funding hole for the Republicans, because now they may have to return the tariffs that they originally collected. And by the way, the fact that they're trying to revise some of those authorities justifying the new tariffs, it's really not going over very well, because quite frankly, the ultimate message is not that old different, and it still technically should be going through Congress, if only for a rubber stamp from the Republicans. So there is also uh, an institutional implication coming from the decision, underscoring the judiciary's willingness to constrain executive authority in trade policy, which historically has leaned heavily towards presidential discretion, because Congress, quite frankly, gave away a lot of their powers unilaterally. So intervening in such a politically charged domain, the court signaled that economic statecraft is no longer insulated from constitutional scrutiny, and that precedent will shape how future administrations design sanctions, tariffs, and industrial policy. Um, the Trump administration, however, reframed that conflict as one between democratic mandate and institutional constraint. Trump's messaging emphasized electoral legitimacy and the need to protect American industry, casting the court as detached from economic realities. Quite frankly, that is a poor argument, because the court was not taking a position whether the policy should be protectionist or liberal. The court was saying that the president should go through Congress in implementing these measures, whatever they may be. And Trump is simply diverting attention from the core argument here. Unfortunately, most people in the US are not legal scholars, and for them, this sort of framing resonated with the MAGA domestic political supporters who already view trade deficits and deindustrialization as existential concerns. By the way, from a practical standpoint, the trade deficit actually increased last year for all of Trump's arguments to the contrary. So, if anyone is serious about those results that Trump promised, they should be asking questions at this point. Of course, India became an immediate casualty of this turbulence. The long anticipated bilateral trade deal that was practically announced very recently was then postponed as both sides are now reassessing the landscape. For New Delhi, the unpredictability of American tariff policy complicates any attempt to lock in long term concessions. India prefers transactional bargaining, but it also seeks stability when entering major trade agreements. This sudden legal and policy whiplash makes any advancement of policies very risky, politically speaking. And from India's perspective, the postponement reflects a broader recalibration of its economic diplomacy. India has spent years diversifying trade relationships, building resilience against unilateral shocks. This ongoing tariff saga reinforces the country's instincts to hedge rather than deepen dependency on any single partner. So, even while maintaining strategic alignment with Washington, New Delhi is likely to slow walk sensitive trade negotiations from now on. And for the US, the postponement is a strategic cost that goes well beyond economics. India occupies a central role in Indo Pacific balancing and supply chain diversification. A stalled trade deal is weakening momentum in a relationship that Washington still sees as critical to countering China's industrial dominance. So, trade friction therefore carries direct geopolitical consequences as well.
Absolutely. How much of this is, a setback for what President Trump wants to do? Because even if with the, new articles that he has put into place, those do not have the same kind of teeth that his tariffs had. How would you assess his? Do you think he must be thinking a lot nowadays?
I do think it's a definite challenge for him. And quite frankly, I think the new tariffs will also be challenged in courts because they, as I mentioned, they're not all that different from old tariffs, and Trump is openly defying the Supreme Court, and I think that institutions are not going to take it lightly. There have been very severe economic consequences for businesses and consumers alike. At various points in time, Trump claimed he would use these taxes and tariffs are taxes to pay off the national debt. Not only has that not happened, but the national debt skyrocketed, and now there are going to be decisions made about how to claw back this money and to return them to various institutions and consumers, including some that actually went out of business over the course of the past year and are no longer legally registered to take that money back in. Um, Presumably, that money would then be sent back to states for redistribution, but it's going to likely to be a long and confusing process in itself, legally and politically alike. Um, but regardless of all of that, whatever Trump was planning to do with that money, technically, that plan is now frozen in place, and whatever new taxes that he is going to try to collect through these means, they are only valid moving forward if they are valid at all. They would not. This framework would not apply to the taxes, to the tariffs that were found to be unconstitutional over this latest decision.
Absolutely. One more thing, Irina, is that how will it politically impact him? Because earlier, by and large, the impression was that President Trump and his administration has a good deal of uh, good deal of influence on the judiciary, U.S. Supreme Court, especially from that point of view. And then this comes in, not just, if I understand, it was 6-3 majority. That is speaking something. How do you think people will be now looking at that? Suddenly all that invincibility is gone. Do you think it will impact him politically and drastically?
I do think that there is also a very clear political message. not only about Trump overstepping his authority in the sense of economic powers that are delegated to Congress, which is quite obviously the very clear rebuke in the Supreme Court decision, especially in Justice Gorsuch's opinion. But there is also an underlying political view that Trump is not made out of Teflon after all, that his administration, the claims that they make are subject to scrutiny, and that he is not a dictator or a unilateral leader that can simply do whatever he pleases. And frankly, Trump acknowledged it in his own controversial remarks, claiming that in all other areas I could probably do whatever I please, but how is it that I can't do it in this regard? He seems almost surprised by this constraint because this is the strongest message yet from the Supreme Court, contradicting his own posture in that regard. So uh, I think it should send a message to his supporters as well that Trump cannot simply do whatever he pleases to to dismiss the Constitution out of hand and to pretend that the other two branches of the government don't exist or exist only to serve him and to rubber stamp his policies. They're meant to balance each other out and to keep his personal views and ambitions in check in order to serve the American people as they were designed to do. And frankly, the American president is a servant. He's a public servant. He's a public official. He's answerable to the people who elected him. So let's hope that this wake up call starts getting through to some people who are up until now were willing to buy into Trump's messaging, no matter how far it took the Americans away from the fact that they once broke free of the British monarchy precisely because of its economic overreach.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. So, do you think the world, he will start looking at the world a bit differently from Venezuela? People were thinking, now it might be Cuba and other places, but I don't know what's happening there. But certainly in the US Iran situation, where are we? Do you think, it is moving towards some solution, some sort of, or do you think the regime's time has come in this way?
The messaging has been very unclear, both from the Trump administration explaining what he's actually looking for, and from the messaging from between the two countries. Trump has warned Iran, even in his State of the Union address, essentially threatening military consequences if the deal is not reached. At the same time, the administration has renewed pressure on Iran to come to the table not only with regards to the nuclear deal but to address the issue of ballistic missiles, and that's something that Israel has been pushing the U.S. Since at least December, and up until only a few days ago, the U.S. was kind of not really pushing Iran all that hard. Now, with most of its military assets finally in place in the Middle East, perhaps U.S. The administration feels it has more room to exact pressure on more fronts from Iran because they have everything they need for even a bigger campaign that what they mentioned should it come to that point. Now, Iran, for its own part, has on the one hand publicly reiterated commitment to making some sort of a political arrangement or a deal, but on the other hand, it has stayed away from indulging the administration and essentially clearly agreeing, messaging that they would take they would abide by all of the administration's red lines, even with regards to the nuclear issue. Leaks have indicated there is still disagreement on some key points. For instance, Iran is not willing to remove existing enriched uranium from inside the country and export it to third countries, whereas U.S. is very much insisting on that fact. It's unclear what ultimately happens today. Some people think is the decision day. Today is the day of the negotiations, and either it works or it doesn't. But others others disagree. They think that there may be some sort of an interim deal to continue to agree on some minimal issue while agreeing to continue negotiations on other things in order to avoid a military escalation and avoid chaos and uncertainty and inevitable economic and commercial and flight disruptions. Some argue that because Witkoff and Kushner are taking the lead on advising whether or not to strike Iran, most likely Iran will manage to buy more time if necessary. The most clear messaging that U.S. is still very much mostly in deterrence and strategic communications posture rather than actually ready for the attack is that on the Israeli front, there hasn't been the sort of top-down messaging that would lead one to conclude the country is preparing for a war. There has been a mobilization in place for the past 2 months, and in that regard, it hasn't changed. But there hasn't been an increase in internal measures in the last few days that would position Israel to be on the brink of war, immediately ready to jump into an attack mode should the negotiations fail in some regard, as they expected to do. So perhaps there is also something secret going on behind the scenes. Perhaps we are only seeing the public exchanges that may be part of the posturing or face saving for one or both of the countries. And perhaps behind the scenes, the US is either closer to accepting Iran's terms, or Iran is actually far closer to compromising, or the Trump administration, even if it does not agree with Iran on the actual terms, is far less farther away from actually taking military escalation that it is messaging to the public. All of these may be true. We will not know until after the negotiations are concluded for today. And once that's done, it will become clear by the mobilization, by flight disruptions, by evacuation of embassies in the nearby, and by the posture of other countries, whether they are preparing for potential attacks and retaliation, whether we will see a military escalation anytime soon, or whether we can expect more rhetorical posturing for an unknown period of time.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. And that is where, my last question of this episode is to understand it. Maybe it will happen, it will not. But obviously, the largest gathering of US forces, if I understand, after the Iraq invasion, do you think it was all about gathering so much of forces just to, just to force a tottering regime into signing some nuclear deal that they will not do this? Was it only because of that? You are telling the students that help is coming, all those protesters. Obviously nobody will be convinced there is something that, as you said, that is imminent, or again it will be a loss of face for President Trump.
I think that when Trump made those comments, he first of all did not expect Iran to go as far as it did in the crackdowns, and he did not fully measure the impact of his messaging. He thought that Iran would simply take to it the way people usually take to it, and he thought perhaps that the uprisings would be sufficient alone to send a message to the regime, and that the regime perhaps would be scared enough of potential U.S. retaliation to take a step back. So I do think he completely underestimated and misjudged Iran's reaction, because he does not have a great deal of direct experience with Iran, and he he has he has seen some of it. He observed some of the processes from the outside. In his first term, there's been some engagement. He's attacked Israel. He's attacked Iran last June. But he thought that the memory of those strikes, coupled with his comments, would be sufficient to put an end to the slaughter. And when it did not happen, it became clear that he at no point really seriously planned on taking military action, nor did he really want to. Trump is trying to avoid escalations. It became clear from his comments that he wanted to avoid open-ended confrontations with unclear, potentially messy results, especially before the midterms, because this is something that both Democrats and some within the Republican Party would pressure him on, and he wants a focused, clean foreign policy and clear political wins before the midterm elections. He does not want his legacy overshadowed by messy confrontations and asymmetrical lingering debacles. But that is a very likely scenario in the event of a serious confrontation with Iran. A symbolic confrontation would not really serve any serious purpose. We have already seen that Witkoff has had to back down from the triumphalist claims the administration made after the June attack, claiming that they obliterated nuclear program. Obviously, that is far from the case. Otherwise, we would not be where we are right now. Trump has also had to recalibrate his rhetoric at various times, first by claiming that his threats to the regime are tied to the treatment of the protesters, then focusing almost exclusively on the nuclear issue, now pivoting from the nuclear issue and more towards the ballistic missiles. And that also raises questions whether Trump knows what his actual objectives really are or should be. And what we do know from his own comments is that he's still, up until this moment, was not decided on a course of action, even as he threatened Iran with military confrontation in the event a deal of some sort was not reached. So he basically wants Iran to present him with something palatable enough he can sell to his domestic audiences without having to take serious action, something that he can present as a political win. But at this point, Trump himself even is not sure what would satisfy his own supporters in that regard.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's so much happening in the world, and there's so much to understand about it all from you. And for that, we will keep on coming back to you. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the World according to Irina Shukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.